I am body and soul.
Mhm.
Like I believe I am body and soul. That's why we believe in the resurrection of the body. These two things are not meant to be separated. That's why death sucks so much. And so, how much I show of my soul, it makes sense for that to how much someone knows of my soul makes sense for it to match up with how much they know of my body.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crab and the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Mary Rose, and my guest today is Veronica Marrinan, co-founder of Litany NYC, a women's clothing line with an online storefront that is based in, of course, New York City. Fashion has a lot of really interesting moral dimensions to it. On the production side, you have a lot of unethical labor practices, things like sweatshops. On the consumer end of it, you have a tendency towards vanity or covetousness or just this acquisition of more. And then like within the clothing itself, you have this topic of modesty. And Veronica and I have a really interesting conversation about some of the nuances that are sometimes lacking in the broader discussion of modesty. I think there's kind of this tension between like the letter of the law and the spirit of the law when it comes to modesty. A lot of people want to make modesty very objective by saying, you can wear this, you can't wear that, this many inches, these body parts have to be covered. And while that makes the rules very simple, a lot of people experience it as kind of reductive and a bit arbitrary. On the spirit of the law side of things, you often have a greater, more holistic understanding of the human person. We're not just bodies. The body's not reduced to sort of an object of lust, but it is really hard to give a prescriptive dimension to modesty when you tend towards the spirit of the law. I know that we are very much taught to be against any kind of moral relativism. And so I think that leads people to favor a more letter of the law approach to modesty. But when you think about the other virtues, we really don't do that. If you think about temperance, for example, nobody says this is the number of drinks you can have or this is how many calories you can eat. We realize that there's a context to these things. Everybody has a different body size. People have different caloric needs depending on what they're, how much they're exercising. What is the occasion? Is there a reason to have a drink? Something like that. If you think about courage, like courage doesn't have a black and white prescriptive about what you're supposed to do in each situation. It's more of a general principle that's supposed to guide your choices, that you don't avoid something out of fear, right? And then, of course, prudence is that virtue that helps you decide what virtue it is that you're supposed to use. And so I think in our conversations about modesty, we have to treat it like the other virtues where it's a much more holistic guiding principle for your life. It's not this black and white, letter of the law kind of thing. So anyways, it's a landmine, but I think Veronica makes a lot of really interesting points, and I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Also, this is the second to the last episode of season 2, so make sure you're following on Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and all of that to stay in touch in the interim. I'd love for you to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. And now here's my conversation with Veronica Marrinan. Veronica Marrinan is the co-founder and creative director of Litany NYC, an online contemplative clothing line. She studied fashion and entrepreneurship at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Veronica, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, Mary Rose. It's so good to finally see your face.
Yeah. So we were chatting before this, and you said that you actually launched this company basically 3 months before COVID took over the world. So how was that? How did you survive? I mean, I guess being an online storefront makes it a little easier, but Did you already have enough items like kind of, with the fabric and ready to go?
So basically my co-founder knew she was entering religious life October 2020. And we both had like gotten let off from our jobs, me like a year before her, and then the company she was working at closed down. And she was nannying, and I was like, if you wanted to, remember that like a business plan we made in college? Like just maybe think about it. Like maybe pray about it over Christmas, And she was like, okay, because then you don't have to like get used to working for someone totally new, knowing you're going to leave. I think,
right,
particularly like joining a new company, you kind of feel like, okay, I kind of have to let you think I'm going to be here for a while for you to feel comfortable hiring me, but also I'm not going to be, like it can be so weird. So she prayed about it. She was like, okay, let's do it. So January 2020, we became an LLC, and we had a family member who passed away who left us some money, which was why we were able to do
this.
Wow. And it even like even survive like COVID, and even survive like just starting up as a clothing company. Clothing is like one of the most difficult things, particularly if you're doing like full scale production and full scale sizing. So because then you have all of this like basically back stock that you have to sell. So we kind of got around that by basically working with different fabric suppliers that we knew in the garment district from our times working in the fashion industry who already liked it.
Yeah.
So they would give us like, the wholesale price for the fabric, even if we were only getting like 5 yards.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which was nice. One of them is named Isaac. He's like the sweet grandpa. He's giving me stuff to send to Olivia, my co-founder, in the mail. But yeah, it's like we already knew we wanted to do made to measure because it just seemed to be a more human approach to fashion. And we knew that there was like technology now with pattern making software where you could make made to measure things without it taking up the normal amount of time. When someone's drafting a pattern by hand, it takes a very long time to make something made. And so we knew we wanted to do that. And then it just also worked together really well with starting a small company and trying to save money up front to do something made to measure, because we have the samples for the photo shoot, but then when someone places an order, we make it for them. So we don't have this upfront cost of like making a garment before someone has paid for it, which has helped us like immensely. So our scarves are the only thing that we have done that with. And we actually started off with like pre-order. So basically the same thing where we had the kind of investment from the customer already. So then we could go and like fulfill the order without needing to have like this huge
inventory.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So did you have previous jobs in the fashion industry before you started this line?
Yeah. So Olivia worked at Zach Posen in production, which was hugely helpful for her to understand the production process and everything. And then she also interned there in college, and then she went to Paris for a semester and kind of like gave me so they like hired me for the semester. She was gone. And so that was, as someone I'm not naturally a very precise person. And so being in production, that's the whole side of it where they're like, okay, here's the exact length of the zipper that you're using for the pant, and here's exactly where it goes. That was really helpful for me to understand, to like make things more streamlined when we started Litany. And even just like keeping track of like our fabric and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, but we also both worked at like I worked at a swimwear company for a little while.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's like that was based in New York, that was like really small. So I got to be, kind of, there was like a 6-person team. So you got to see the whole aspect of design to production going to the factories. They were super nice too, and like really helpful with answering any questions I had about how they started.
Yeah.
And then I worked at a hijab company for
really
for a little while, and it was so funny. I was not good at administrative tasks, so I got fired.
Oh no.
But they were so sweet and kind about it, and they were just like, we're such a small company. Like they were getting bigger. They were maybe like a 10-person point in the office, but they were like, you're the one other person on the design team, and normally you wouldn't have to be like really great at math,
Mm-hmm.
but where we are, and I was like, okay. And I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But I learned so much about what it's like to make clothing for a group of women who really care about their faith, but also
Mm-hmm.
really care about being beautiful
Yeah.
and investing in it and kind of navigating those waters of like beauty, understanding your beauty being something that can draw you close to God because you're recognizing how beautifully he made you and also balancing that out with not becoming vain and not
Mm.
becoming materialistic. And kind of, yeah, it was just incredibly valuable to me to like understand that
Yeah.
from the perspective of a customer who I wasn't already, you know.
Right. Were you the only non-Muslim like working for the company?
Hmm. No, they had a lot of non-Muslims working there, but I was the only one who was like practicing a religious faith.
Oh, okay. That's so
It was
interesting.
very interesting to like have these conversations, but also so helpful because they would take their time to pray during the day.
Yeah.
They would be so comfortable with me just being like, okay, on my lunch break, is it okay if I take a little longer because I want to go to daily mass? And they'd be like, yeah, go,
Mm.
you know. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I went to Catholic University and surprisingly we had a decent sized Muslim population. And so there were,
Mhm.
some accommodations where, they could, step out to do their prayers and whatnot, some places set aside for them to do their prayers. And there was an article published about them. And I think the initial angle was to try to like make it seem like we were a hostile environment to the Muslims, like because we're a Catholic university, which is like it's kind of in the name, like it wasn't really a
Yeah.
surprise, but they said they felt more comfortable being there because they knew it was a place where religion was at least like appreciated and respected versus if they're at a
Yeah.
secular college, then religion is like much more seen in suspicion.
Yeah, and that's been my experience too, even like in college, getting close to my Jewish friends who
Hmm.
were observant. Like the amount of conversation that we had about like modesty and kind of how our perspectives on it had changed and how our living it out was like becoming a part of our lives as adults. And also just like being a young person who really loves living in New York City
Yeah.
and also loves their faith, you know, and
Yeah.
takes it very seriously and doesn't think you're silly for doing that, you know, like that was wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Are you a New Yorker by birth or
I grew up on Long Island,
okay,
so
okay.
family's like maybe 2 hours away from the city.
Okay.
Very Long Island.
I don't hear the accents.
Oh my gosh, I always get that. I say water, apparently like someone from like Philly,
Yeah,
which I always get teased about. I have no clue where it came
water,
from.
yeah.
But I can go in with like the coffee if I need
Yeah, yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah.
Or
If you
my
need to
cousin
blend
has
in.
it.
Yeah, I'm in Maryland, so it's sort of I'm in Southern Maryland, so it's kind of
Mhm.
the South, but my dad's from North Carolina, and I've noticed that whenever I'm trying to be very polite, I just slip into more of a Southern accent because it just seems like more polite, like more kind, like,
Yeah.
well, would
More
you
friendly.
mind? Yeah. So, okay. So this it's interesting because most people have this, I guess, perception of anything in New York fashion as like cutthroat, devil wears Prada. But it doesn't sound like that was really has been your experience.
Yeah, I kind of and I got a little bit of pushback from professors for having this approach. But even, and I have ADHD, even before getting diagnosed with this, I kind of understood the way my brain worked and what I needed to be a creative in like a holistic way.
Hmm.
And so we would have students like, you know, lining up around the block to sign up to volunteer for Fashion Week for free.
Yeah.
And and you're, I mean, if you're volunteering for Fashion Week, you're there like from 6 a.m., maybe even earlier, 5 a.m. to like 2 a.m. the next day. You
Oh
know,
my
like it's
gosh.
really intense. Unless you're working with a company who really values your time, really cares a lot about everyone involved and all this kind of stuff. And so I kind of just like didn't go for those things, which I think by the grace of God didn't end up biting me in the foot because obviously those provide a lot of experience.
Hmm.
But I just really made the point to have internships with companies that really seem to care about the people involved. Like it's like they would when I was interviewing and they were like, okay, it's an unpaid internship, but we can give you a lunch and a travel stipend. Do you know what I mean? Like those kinds of
Right.
things where They really cared about my time, my energy, and that enabled me to like I cannot do good creative. I can't be creative when I'm completely burnt out.
Oh no,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
and so yeah, I feel like, and some people can't. Like my one of my friends, she's a bridal designer now. Like
Hmm.
the stuff she pulled off in college, like I'm talking like 200 handmade flowers on a ball gown,
Wow.
like up all night. Like she thrives on that kind of
Mm.
like adrenaline,
Yeah.
and I can't, like it's just I, I think like I'm sure that there are parts of the fashion industry that are cutthroat like that. I just kind of like completely avoided that with
Sure. Yeah.
because yeah, I think I think also knowing that when we started Litany, eventually I knew I would want it to be a company that like put the human person's dignity at the center. So I kind of didn't want to learn in the fashion industry from people who weren't already doing that,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you went into college, did you know that your end goal was to start your own clothing line?
A little bit. I knew I wanted to do like I was very I don't know what the word is. Like, you know how you get older and your beliefs get more integrated, and you're like, oh, okay, truth, beauty, goodness, instead of like, here's how many inches your hemline needs to
Yeah.
be from your knee. So when I
Right.
went into college, I was very much like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna be a little Catholic influencer,
Mm.
and the way that that is not that that's bad, but I just had this very like I think I saw this like box of femininity, and I wanted to live my faith out well.
Right.
And the box of femininity meaning like only one size fits all of like, okay, you wear your 1950s style dresses, which is
Mm.
great, but that just isn't my personality, but I tried to make it that. And
Yeah.
I was like, modest fashion, and that's gonna be what I'm gonna do, which is still what I'm doing. But it was very like um it was a very regimented and like kind of
Like,
segmented approach to it. And then as I
right.
went through college, and um, I spent a lot of time with the Dominican priests at like St. Joseph's in Greenwich Village and the Catholic Center at NYU and stuff. And just like, I mean, Dominican preaching, I mean, my
Oh,
gosh, like
I know.
the,
I
the
know.
it's just like this holistic approach to the human person where I was just like,
Yeah.
okay, like, and then I went to Lourdes and I was like,
Oh,
oh, this is like body and soul are one. Like, it's not just about, oh, I have to make these rules to make my body fit my faith. Like, my body is me, like, this is good. Um, and like, it just, it was so, it's like I stopped being so preoccupied with what I thought um my like career journey would be. And it just kind
yeah.
of meeting Olivia, it just kind of naturally unfolded into this like really yeah, peaceful and like creative approach to fashion, kind of more like I would imagine a painter would be.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, because
yeah.
I can see now, I mean, especially just, with how prolific Instagram is, that there is almost this like Catholic aesthetic, but it can just be its own aesthetic, just as you have, sort of like your cottage core is big right now,
Yeah.
or, back in like the day, like your sort of scene kid or your
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever your like fashion music aesthetic is. Like Catholic is just its own aesthetic, where it's like
Mm.
modest clothes, but it's almost just modest for the sake of being its own like rebellious, aesthetic. Like,
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of like stick it to the man, very us against them
right,
approach.
right,
Like,
right.
yeah, we are not of the world, but we are in the world.
Hmm.
And I really the most that I the most personal my relationship with my faith has been, the most personal my relationship with God has been the times when I've stopped looking at things from an us versus the world thing, and
Yeah.
a argumentative way, and instead just curiosity, because I truly do believe that like the Catholic Church is the fullness of truth. And if I believe that, why on earth would I be argumentative about it? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
like
Like,
you don't have to be threatened. You're
any,
like,
yeah,
you know, I mean, if someone has a
yeah,
question, you want to be able to defend the faith. But I see right now, especially online, there's just sort of this more like offensive attack,
yeah,
and I don't know.
yeah,
When I guess when you read the gospels, you can kind of see that with Jesus, contra the Pharisees,
but
but
he's like, he knew
nobody
their
else
hearts.
really.
Yeah, and he knew their hearts. That's the thing.
That is true.
God, like he immediately knew what they needed to hear. And I'm not God. I don't know the innermost corners of someone's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so why on earth would I think that I could give them like I don't really believe in quote unquote tough love,
Mm,
especially with people that you don't know well at all.
right.
I found that like I had a classmate at FIT just kind of like ask me how it felt to know that God loved me.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't someone that I was like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic, by the way, and I don't agree with XYZ about your life and blah blah
Right.
blah blah. It was just like, oh, Veronica's like late at FIT was you weren't 15 minutes early. So it's like, oh, sometimes Veronica's late because she goes to mass beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's things would just naturally come up in conversation. And then it was like this just very curious, gentle asking.
Yeah.
And it just like also there are as many ways to be Catholic as there are Catholics. That's what I love
It's really true. Yeah.
about it. Yeah, universal faith.
Right. If you can go from being like a missionary in a foreign country to never leaving the confines of a cloister, like
Yeah,
that's as much variety as it gets in a
yeah,
sense.
exactly. Yeah. And like you can be Catholic and a scene kid, you know what I mean? Like
Right,
there's
right,
all,
right.
all of it, which I love. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, because you've brought up modesty a couple of times, and I have just found that there is no landmine quite like the topic of modesty, where, I mean, so like I taught at a Catholic high school for a while, and so even just having to sort of police the uniform and like the skirt length, like I feel like I tried every approach. You can try it from the approach of like modesty, or you can just try it from the approach of like this is the rule and
Yeah.
it's very arbitrary as to like why it's the rule, but it's the rule, you know? And people have so many sensitivities to it. And then like, I've been reading a lot of I don't know, writing from people who are kind of in like a deconstruction phase, and they talk about how
Mm.
harmful it was to be, harped on about modesty. And I mean, I almost feel like it's one of those topics I don't even want to touch because it's so fraught with like tension. But like, I do
Especially
believe at
on
the end of the
social
day, there's
media.
something important about it. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you found like even like a definition of modesty that is helpful or that like encompasses the totality of the virtue?
I mean, in terms of like modesty as a virtue, maybe not because it's so much broader, but in terms of
Yeah.
clothing, um, and fashion, I think the right now where I'm at with it that feels very settled in myself and very peaceful is I am body and soul. Like
Mm-hmm.
I believe I am body and soul. That's why we believe in the resurrection of the body. These two things are not meant to be separated. That's why death sucks so much. And so how much I show of my soul, it makes sense for that to how much someone knows of my soul makes sense for it to match up with how much they know of my body.
Wow.
So, like a stranger on the street, I don't know that. I don't know if they're a safe person to
Mm-hmm.
receive my soul. So then that's not someone I'm going to like get changed in front of. That's
Mm-hmm.
some place where I'm more mindful of how much of my body I'm showing because it's also my soul. Meanwhile, like I'll get changed in front of my little sister. That's a safe relationship to like see like a body like hers, you know what I mean? And like in front of like say like my best friend, you know what I mean? Like I'm totally comfortable, getting changed in front of her because I know this relationship is safe. I know that this relationship is a healthy one and this person knows of my soul well. And I think that's also why like it would make sense in marriage the person who you share your soul with the most, of course, is going to see your body the most.
Right.
And I that's what I found the most helpful because it's reverent and it's
Yeah.
not so much focused on external and like worrying that you're getting it wrong.
Hmm.
Because I think that that's kind of what I've seen and from my own experiences and my mom talking about her experiences and stuff like that. And like also hearing people, like you said, deconstructing, it's the like, oh, you're doing that wrong. And that's
Yeah.
shameful
Yeah.
approach. Like okay, if within yourself, like what is safe, what is good, what is right, what is reverent. And then that just kind of flowing from within. And some people don't like that because it's not a clear delineation,
Right,
it's not a
exactly.
clear
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
But also I think that it's good that it isn't, because it requires a, a personal, like a continual becoming and a personal relationship with God to be able to like exist with a framework that doesn't have a particular rule.
Right. Which I mean is like all of the quote unquote rules are supposed to flow from that relationship.
Yeah,
We often do it backwards. And then I think
exactly. Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
then you run into this thing where it's like you can give the appearance of being a very virtuous person because you do follow the externals, you know?
Yes, but like meanwhile, your mind is so far from a relationship with like
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
relationship or two. Yeah.
Right.
Um, yeah. And so I think like, yeah, and of course I think largely people have good intentions
Sure,
in
of
their heart
course.
and honesty. But and sometimes I'm like, okay, this person doesn't want to have a conversation. Like I've gotten some messages being like, you can't really be a Catholic company because you sell pants. And I'm like,
What?
oh, great. Well,
Oh, the pants thing. I just can't with the
I'm just
pants.
like, oh, all right, like nice.
Yeah, you're like, well, what about
You
all
know,
the men that wore dresses back in the day, you know?
thank you. Okay, yeah, yeah, that's been my thing with that is I'm like, Jesus wore a dress. Like if we're going to define masculinity and
The priests
femininity,
wear a dress like every
real
day.
things. Thank you. Yes, yes. And it's not like I think oftentimes we look to like times bygone
Mhm.
to feel like we're time, like because we understand that our souls are eternal and also like our bodies are eternal, with the
Right.
resurrection of the body. So like I think sometimes we look to like times gone by, like this approach of looking back to the 1950s for
Mhm.
fashion and being like, oh, this is timeless. Wearing a dress as a woman is timeless because it doesn't feel like the time I'm in. Um,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
it still is like time, you know what I mean? And it makes sense to me. I don't think it's necessarily bad for someone to want to do that. I think it's more the making it a universal moral truth that everyone else should aspire to. Like it's almost like it's too zoomed in. Like we need to zoom out a little.
Yeah.
That like anything we wear is tied to the time we're in, like
Right.
it's just a reality.
You just can't transcend it in this life.
Yeah, like men were the first to wear heels, like it's just
Wait, real? Oh, wait.
yeah, like Louis, like
Really?
the king, like the French kings or whatever, they were wearing
Oh.
it was to keep their feet in the stirrups of the horse.
Oh,
But then
okay.
they started becoming fancier and fancier, and it was like to show off your like nice long
Right.
calves and you wear tights.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, one of the things that has kind of shifted my belief a little bit is I met a woman recently who's a convert to the faith, and she told me when she was a teenager she just kind of wandered into an Easter Vigil service, like because there was a church on the beach or sort of on the shoreline, and she was kind of like, what's this crowd outside with like candles and a bonfire, let me go see
Yeah.
what's happening. And she was wearing like a bikini top and like Daisy Dukes because she had just been at the beach all day. And then she just kind of like stayed for the whole service, you know?
Yeah.
And people were like, oh, do you want a sweater? She's like, I'm fine.
You know.
but but I like her telling me that story. I was like, that was her first time ever going to a Catholic church.
Yeah.
And
Like, can you imagine if someone was like, how dare you show up like this? Like,
exactly. Yeah, which I mean, I would be giving someone some weird looks if they were at an Easter
yeah, of
Vigil
course,
in a
because you're kind of
bikini
like, it's a
top.
swimsuit, but also like, I think that's the thing is like, objectively, yeah, like we don't wear swimsuits in church. And also, there's always going to be this subjective experience that goes
Mhm.
outside of that. And that is a
Yeah.
perfect example of that. Like
Yeah.
it's,
And like I had another friend who she came into the church like in high school and I remember her at the Easter Vigil just wearing like a very tight and like very short dress because that's just kind of like when you're a teenager, that's almost just what a nice dress is.
yes,
You
okay,
know?
yeah, yep, yeah.
It wasn't like an intention to be provocative, but it's sort of just like, yeah, you go to like the mall and you get a dress and it's just naturally gonna not come very close to your knee, you know?
Yeah, and you wear your super high heels, and that's like very feminine and beautiful and fancy. Yeah.
Right. And maybe from like the outset it looked sort of off, but in a way, like, I'm glad that nobody really made a big deal about it, because she's really evolved into this incredibly, like, I don't know, I mean, modest in like the full sense of the term, like elegant woman, but that was just where she was at the time, like with like the way the externals, fit with the internal. So I don't know, I mean, I don't know what that means, but I think, like you said, there has to be this modesty has to come from this internal kind of recognition.
Yeah. And I think the attitude of like accusing, I think, is often very, very, like, it goes through it's this thread that goes through people's experiences with modesty that was hurting them, or just experiences with anything at all. And like Satan is the one who's called the accuser, and I think to pull away that accusatory approach and instead have curiosity is just
really because good. I think it's one thing if you are intentionally doing something and then you're called out, but
exactly.
But that feeling of being accused of something when you weren't trying to do anything wrong, it kind of ultimately is a false accusation, and that like really gets to the core of your being, because you're like, that's not who I am.
And also, this person isn't safe, and the experience around them might not be safe for me, and so you pull just naturally,
right?
Yeah.
So then, just to push back though a little bit on what you said about, like, if somebody's a safe person, you want to, the more you can reveal your soul to somebody, the more you can reveal your body to them. What about just going to the beach, where there's lots of strangers around, and you're not going to reveal your soul to them, but you're probably also not going to wear like a full wetsuit,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and that's where that's why I'm kind of like, well, this is where what I've settled in right now. I feel like this is a constant growing and becoming of my understanding of all of it. But also, like, that there are experiences where this is the attire for this place. And it just makes sense to dress like that for that experience. But maybe that's just because I've grown up wearing a swimsuit when I go, you know what I mean? Or when I go to the beach, it feels comfortable, But yeah, I think that's probably why, and also maybe it's also expected to share, like, to show that your body to wear a swimsuit.
I mean, in a way, you could call more attention to yourself if you're
that's what I was thinking. Yeah. And I was going to say that, but then also that's an external approach too that I kind of like maybe has been helpful to me at some points, but
I mean, it's a tricky thing because, like, context is very relevant, when you go to the doctor, that's a context where
exactly. They don't know your whole soul and your whole life, but they gotta
check you out. And like, I mean, in most cases, doctors are very safe people. Unfortunately, you can't always say 100% with anything, but it like intention, context, I think that's why it's so hard to boil it down to like a precise rule, because there's always going to be exceptional circumstances where it's like appropriate to do otherwise, I suppose.
And also, like, I think just forming our reason is great, and like most people are pretty reasonable, I think we can trust ourselves to like figure out what's good in different scenarios. Like, it is very reasonable to wear a swimsuit. It is very reasonable to go to the doctor,
Yeah. And I mean, there's always just a way in which you can do something. Like, you can wear a swimsuit in a way that is more provocative than other
even
ways, It's very, I mean, I don't know. One of the things I've noticed with women is that, like, when we choose clothes, we're often looking at the pattern and the colors and the style and just like what is in the clothing itself. And we're not so much thinking about the areas where the clothing's not going to cover. We're looking at the outfit itself. Whereas, some people would say that the viewer, they're not as interested in what you're wearing. They're looking at the areas where you're not wearing something.
Yeah, and that's like totally going to be an unsafe person. Like,
Yeah.
I think of that all the time of like, yeah, just people will say oftentimes, oh, well, men's brains are wired in XYZ to like look at women, like the parts of women that the clothing isn't covering and all this kind of stuff. Also, like, yeah, maybe their brains are wired like that, but our brains are wired by so many things, including like the neural pathways that we're constantly using. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, parts of your brain shrink and grow
Wow.
based on what you're experiencing, the amounts of cortisol that are going through. So like, yeah, maybe a lot of guys' brains are wired that way, but like maybe it's common, but maybe it's not like primordial, I guess, is the way that I've been considered in terms of like having met people who don't view me that way, who are men, where it's not this horrible struggle to like, to view me as I view myself.
Right. To view you as a whole person, even if like your skirt is a little short,
Yeah, exactly. To be able to like chat with a girl in a bikini and it not be like this really difficult thing, you know what I mean? Exactly. Like it's to actually be able to see her as a person, I think is a virtue, and it's great. And I think yeah, like people who aren't able to do that, I think are capable of it, of growing in that. And also, yeah, maybe not the safe people.
Right. Well, I think that's, as like women, I don't know, we're very perceptive of things. So like when somebody, like when a man, let's say, compliments what you're wearing, like you can tell whether it's just a genuine compliment or like a creepy compliment. And it's very hard to explain it, but you can just pick up on like little micro, I don't know, gestures, I guess, or intonation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think the man who I've been who's really understood me explaining that is one of my very good friends who's a Black man who experiences like racial microaggressions all the time.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, that something that someone is saying to you that might not come off as a problem to me because I don't have that experience is very real to you. And I can put myself in your shoes and understand it,
Right.
But like, yeah, you're constantly scanning for like, what is someone's intentions? Is it safe? And like, yeah, just knowing men now who are like my friends who are like, oh my gosh, Veronica, the color of those jeans, like that's a great shade of blue. Like that's awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like the fact that could be the compliment of what you're wearing is just wonderful and so pure,
Right. I mean, it's kind of similar to a joke in the sense that like if you just saw like a comedian's, list of jokes written out, you'd be like, this isn't funny. Like, this is really rude.
Exactly. But the way they deliver it is
the delivery really matters. And same thing with a compliment. Or it's also, I think, the same way when somebody delivers certain, let's say, modesty regulations. Like you can tell if there's just ways that people say it where you're like, do you have a problem?
Yeah, your heart is showing.
Yeah, you're like, you are really obsessive about this. Like, I don't know. I don't. Anyways, it's a landmine, but I think it's important to talk about because, like you said, it gets to. It's ultimately supposed to be at the heart of who we are as people, and as embodied persons, we are always reflecting things like realities in a physical way, and so what you wear does say certain things about you, and you want to be in control of the message,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned about your company, at least on your company webpage, is this commitment to being like ethical fashion.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, and how does Litany like actually carry that out?
Yeah, so ethical fashion, sometimes people will just look at it as eco-ethical, so like, basically not using dyes that really harm the earth when they go through runoff and stuff like that, not using harsh chemicals, maybe using like something like a fiber like Tencel, which is like a really awesome fiber both to wear and it's like okay for the environment to use. But then there's also this broader expectation with ethical fashion that a lot more people are starting to have, which is like basically that every person involved in making the garment should be cared for.
Hmm.
Um, and that the company has a responsibility to taking care of not only like, paying the salary of the person who designs it, but also paying the people who sew it.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a different pattern maker, paying that, and like paying them fair living wages in an environment that is safe and comfortable for them. So like sometimes we will work with factories in the garment district, but we're shifting more towards like a seamstress based
Oh, okay.
perspective. Really, I love it, and I'm so hopeful
Yeah.
for it. It's so much more like long term. I want to have a studio where we have a seamstress like
Okay.
salary, But when we were starting out and working with factories a lot, we'd go into the garment district and look at the factory, and if they didn't have a kitchen area, I'd be
Mm-hmm.
like, we're not
Oh,
doing,
wow.
because if you don't even have a microwave for your employees, like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, like, yeah, okay, the workspace might be fine, and they might, maybe it's a little crowded, but like, is there enough light? Um, you
Hmm.
like just all these things. And even like with factories that we work with that are not local, we're very intentional about asking them for the proof of like, okay, here's the sick leave that our employees get. Here's the like all of the regulations that we follow and that we're in compliance with, and they show us that information. And if we can do like a virtual walkthrough of the factory, also we like to do that. And that's mostly for our scarves. And like you can also kind of tell, even if you're not local, how the like even just in the tone of how they loop people from like the accounting department into
Hmm.
email,
Yeah.
like how enjoyable of a workspace is this?
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I used to really look at it as just everyone being paid fairly. And then there were some factories that had like, yeah, just really unsafe working conditions and had collapses.
Hmm.
And I was just like, okay, yep, this is a lot bigger. It's like, is there a crack in the wall that they're worried about? Uh,
Right.
and so obviously there's such a small dent that we can make as a small company, but my hope is that like, I mean, also like I'm hopeful for legislation kind of around the world that makes ethical fashion something that supports everyone involved in it. But also what I feel is we have a responsibility in our little corner of the universe and the world to do what is good and loving and
Right.
dignify everyone in the process.
Right. Because I mean, people can talk like moral theologians can talk about like, well, it's just remote cooperation with evil. So if you buy something and, way back down the line, it was made in an unethical way, like you're not guilty of any sort of quote unquote
Yeah,
sin,
and
you know?
and I would say like they're probably right. Like these big corporations or these big like that are sending tons of orders to these factories with and knowing that there
Hmm.
are structural issues there. They're very, like I wouldn't say someone is like evil for buying something from, I don't know, Shein or whatever, like a fast
Right.
fashion company. Because I mean, like
Well,
it,
I mean,
and
there's just so many like layers that it goes to before
yes,
it gets to
exactly.
you.
Yeah. And as a fashion company, you kind of have access to more of those layers. And so I think you have a
Yeah.
responsibility for more of those layers.
Right. But it's like, I mean, I still don't want to be
Yeah,
supporting that to the extent that
exactly.
I can, but I mean, it's almost, I don't want to say it's completely impossible, but you either
Yeah.
have to do a lot of research or like me, like I try to buy a lot of things secondhand or
Yeah.
actually my favorite thing is to buy secondhand, but with the tags on it. So then I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, it's not quite secondhand, but it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, I listened to like a podcast actually recently about just the process of like mining the cobalt for the batteries that power our smartphones and like
Oh,
the absolute
no.
slave labor involved. And I'm like, well, what do I do? Like I already have a
Yeah,
phone.
exactly.
Like I'm not gonna
Mhm.
throw the phone away because that doesn't really
Yeah.
change anything. But you're like, I don't know. I mean, you sort of feel like this guilt, but you also realize how little you can do about it because a lot of these companies
Mhm.
they want to be so profitable that they can just come up with a PR scheme to like say, oh, we fixed it, it's good, everything's okay.
Yes. Yeah. And in the fashion industry, we call that greenwashing. Like H&M does it all the time. And it's really hard to tell what is greenwashing and what isn't, even as a designer, even as someone in the industry. And so to expect a consumer to do that is also really a lot.
Right.
And I think we have like a price breakdown for our garments on our website for each one. And so in there we have like everything from how much like the notions cost, which are like buttons, thread, tag, stuff like that, the materials, how much someone's getting paid to make it, and what our markup is. So what's the markup we're using to pay my salary and my employee's salary and all that kind of stuff. And I think if a company has a level of transparency like that, that's really good because it allows the consumer to be kind of more in on all those layers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think that like the high fashion companies, like Gucci, Prada, these where their stuff is just massively expensive, do you think that their process is any more ethical than like the fast fashion, Forever 21 kind of thing? Or do you think it's just the markup at the end of the day for like the brand name?
Oh, so I love talking about this because this is such an interesting thing. So like these brands, usually they have like a wide range of things.
Okay.
And so they make a lot of money off their perfume. Something like Coach, they make a lot of money off of their like purses. So they do have this side of it that's much more consumerist, you know what I mean? Like much more, it's not fast fashion, but it's much more of like, okay, we're making something and a lot of people are buying it. Whereas what they put on the runway shows is more of like art. And also you're going to have people, you're going to have stylists pulling things from these designers to put on celebrities for them to wear. And then they're going to send it back, Some people, like really rich people who we don't even ever see. This was the wildest thing about being in the industry, that I was just like, what, like people who are so wildly wealthy and like in such a different world, like kind of like the Succession HBO show world, where you live in such a different world that like I don't even see you wearing these clothes, and you're not a celebrity, so you're not in paparazzi photos or anything like that,
right?
But people are buying these, and it's very like socialite circles. But I think largely I think there is value in high fashion from the perspective of art. So like if we see something like a Monet, we're not gonna be like, why on earth is that so expensive?
Yeah.
But there is this approach too that like it is an art, and so it makes sense that it has a lot of value. And it's not just that it's an art because of the effort that it took to make it. I mean, it does in these couture ateliers where they're hand sewing everything. They wear like these white lab coats. They have these gloves. Everything is so carefully made. You'll have like 5 women at a time working on a mannequin. And that approach is much more artistic. So there is value added in that, but also just the fact that this idea was something artistic dreamed up in the designer's mind or the design team's mind, and they want to create art. And I don't even want to say the canvas, because it's so much more involved than a canvas. Like a person is so much more involved in a garment than a canvas is a painting.
Right.
But for a human person to be involved in that artwork, it's interesting how, because we wear clothing every day, we kind of look at like high fashion as like not as valuable as like a Monet,
Yeah.
Simply because it's on a human person, but also as Catholics, we understand the value of a human person. So it kind of makes sense for it to almost be more valuable in that sense, the person involved in showing this artwork.
Right. I mean, there is a way in which I think, though, some of it probably varies, but like sometimes models are dehumanized in the way that they are really just 100%. Living mannequins,
Yes. And this is me like being like this philosophical like approach of like what it ought to be and what it can be.
Right.
The ideas of what this is and how it can be beautiful. And then there's like, people like Karl Lagerfeld who are like, was a raging racist, and you've got, this approach of like yeah, basically using models, like you said, as mannequins and maybe even like the it girl of a campaign. But
Mm-hmm.
because she has the personality, or she's acting with the personality that you want her to, you know,
Right.
works well with you. If she didn't have that personality, if she stood up and advocated for herself because she felt like she needed to, then she would be a problem, and
Right. Right.
that makes me icky. Yeah.
What do you guys do you mostly use friends for models, or do you hire like from an actual agency?
We've done both. So actually we're having our next shoot May 4th, and we actually have hired a model. So we use like this I don't even know what to call it. Like it's not quite an agency, but it's more of a it puts it a little bit more in the model's hands. So it's called
Okay.
New Book. So they basically make a profile and stuff, and the company itself doesn't take a percentage of the model's cut until it's like $5,000 or whatever. And the
Oh,
models will
wow.
like less than that for per day. So and they'll have, like hourly rates, and then they'll say this is our rate for the day. And it's great because it kind of makes it so that there's no opportunity to haggle with the model
Hmm.
about their the money that they're making, that they deserve to be making. And so we've done that for like our first photo shoot. We're doing that for this photo shoot. We've also worked with friends for our second and third photo shoots. For the third one with the Holy Family, we really wanted to like take this approach of family and motherhood. And so we had one of my friends who's a young mom come with
Hmm.
her two little ones on set,
Oh.
um, which was really nice and great. And then so there is kind of like this trade-off in both those experiences, because with friends you have this very personal relationship with someone, and that like is just so valuable to me. And then also with a professional model, they come and they know what they're doing, you know what I
Hmm.
mean, like they
Yeah.
like things that I would never even have thought of, like how to hold your hands. They're
Oh.
like I don't you don't have to kind of like coach them at all for like, oh, here's
Yeah.
that pose, they just like. And so we have a lot to take photos of for this shoot, and so I'm kind of like, okay, I think we need a professional
Professionals.
to like
Yeah.
really bring
Yeah,
it
I mean, it
out.
makes sense because you have to have a lot of body awareness,
Oh my gosh. And this is why dancers make such good models too, because they are
Oh,
so aware
yeah.
of their bodies. Yeah.
Right, right. Even like
Yeah.
the facial expressions, like you can't have you, I mean, in a way, your face has to be either sort of a blank canvas or like you have to know how to tweak your
Mhm.
expressions, so you don't look like
Yeah.
bored or
And
mad
emotive and
or,
stuff. Yeah. Yeah. It's just as difficult as acting. I think
Huh,
maybe, and in some ways, I think it might be there are trade-offs. I think in
right,
some perspectives it's more difficult because you don't have as much material to work with, you know.
right.
And so you really are like, if someone says like, oh, I want like fall, like I want like grungy fall. Okay, you have to suddenly like make a grungy fall
Yeah.
face. And how do you do? Coco Roca is a model who she just seems so fun, and like
Uh-huh.
she's also and watching her like social media about modeling is very intriguing to me because she is so emotive.
Hmm.
Um, and she kind of like, yeah, brings this like personality to modeling that makes you realize just how much is actually involved in it. And also that like you can't look uncomfortable, but
Yeah, yeah.
maybe it's really hot, like.
Yeah. I know that was like one of the I don't know if you ever watched like America's Next Top Model, but it was interesting
Oh yeah.
to watch that just like because I could look at a picture and be like, looks good to me, and they would have all
Yeah.
these very nuanced critiques and and then
Yeah.
you'd see how long the photo shoots lasted and how you have to like hold these uncomfortable positions for a long time and you're like, okay, there's actually some
Yeah.
skill here. It's not just a pretty
Yeah.
face, like.
Yeah. And they also, also the upped ante of it being reality TV, and kind of
Yeah.
that it's even more intense. I think just like emotionally for these girls is, yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. So I'm I don't know much about business. I'm not a numbers person either, but
I
like
am not a math guy either. Yeah.
but
That's why I took
I mean
entrepreneurship. I was like,
but when I hear about somebody starting their own company from scratch, I just am like, do you make money? Like how do you pay
yeah,
multiple employees? I mean,
yeah.
I you don't have to like give, tell us like what your bottom line is and everything, but
Oh, but like, yeah,
is it,
I
do
bet
you feel
it's
like
so.
was it hard to get to a point where you could pay yourself and multiple employees like
Oh yeah,
full
yeah. Okay, so
salary?
that's my thing is everyone else has to get paid.
Yeah.
Um, And I'm figuring it out as I go is kind of my approach. But I also like, I've gotten more open about this over time, simply from like talking with people who will be like, oh, I think I want to start my own business. Like, how on earth did you do it with Litany? Like, I feel like there's a responsibility to be transparent and be like, it wasn't from scratch. Like, it was tough and sad that someone died. And also like, how generous of them to allow us to do this. You know, what a huge gift that is. And so I think it's more about like, yeah, and some people, they do that with having investors, you know, some people do that with taking out loans. And some people, you know, they start without a product. So they start with a service, and that's what makes it possible for them to do it from scratch, because they don't have to invest in like a lot of equipment, so to speak, you know. But even if you're a photographer, I mean, you're investing in cameras and all this kind of stuff. But I think that, yeah, it's been a lot of very careful math to be like, okay, you know, we're able to do this now, thank God, what a gift. And also like, there's a responsibility to really to use this gift well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, be a good steward of what you've been given.
Exactly. Yeah, and to do it in a way that's like very like, that puts the people who are working for Litany first. And so like like, you know, doing market research, figuring out what their work is valued financially. See that, you know, like, if we have interns, like they're either paid or we're giving them a stipend, or you know, that approach of like, everyone's time and work is valuable. But yeah, and then we also kind of have realized that we didn't plan on doing scarves originally. Like,
oh really?
I know, right? So we like
so many scarves.
I know. So we did like our Lord's collection, and I designed the print for that one. And then Olivia and I were like, I mean, you know, we could just I wonder if people would want scarves, you know, like it would be more affordable than the garments. Some people really want to like support us, but they're like in college, you know, like,
right.
Small scarf might be a good way to do that. And so we made our small size scarf, and people loved it. And we had a really good friend who's like the most elegant woman I ever have met, who was like, oh, do you have it in a bigger size? And we were like, no, but we can make it in a bigger size. And then we just were like, okay, we're going to take photos with her scarf before we send it to her and make it available on the website. And that way, if anyone else wants it, they can. And now people have big size scarves also. And so that became kind of like the very easy to fulfill order, because with our garments, they're made to measure, so it takes more time to get to the customer. Because the scarves, I have them right there. Someone orders them, I pack them up, and they go right out, you know. And it's also something that's more accessible to a lot of people. It's an accessory, you know. They can start with everything. It's really giftable. And so that product that like still has the essence of what the ethos of Litany in it, and also is more accessible to more people, has been really because also old elegant rich ladies love scarves too. Like, it's a product that lots of people can enjoy, you know.
No, I think scarves need to make, like, fashion scarves need to make a comeback, you know. It's like, it can be like the female version of like the necktie, you know, like.
Yes, exactly. And then it's like, and then we have all of these like prints that we have thank you cards that I like to like put a little customer when they make an order, and so we can make little thank you cards with like our little prints on them. And it being something too that like other people are obviously going to get into the fashion space and like the Catholic fashion space too, and that's absolutely wonderful. And also having something that's entirely our own, where like someone else can make their own prints too, but they're not going to be the same as our prints, because you know, so that's also it's a space for being artistic that like I love making them so much.
Okay. I'm actually curious, like, how do you get, like, how do you draw up the design, and how does that get on a scarf? Is it a print? Like, how does that work?
So we started out with this this printer in California named Sanjay, who's absolutely lovely, but doesn't print double-sided. And then we had a factory reach out to us and was like, hey, do you want double-sided printing? And we were like, but they have like what's called like a higher minimum order quantity. So like we have to order more from them.
Okay.
Than we get with Sanjay. With Sanjay, I can get 5 scarves from him at a time. With these people, it's like 100 per order. And so we're like slowly sort of going in that direction over time as we gain more customers and more, when we're like, okay, people will buy this. But what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so I have Photoshop on this computer here. It's like a tablet computer thing. And I have a little pen that goes with it. And I draw the flowers and everything on the tablet.
Okay.
And then eventually like we work with the factory to make sure that the color printing is matching what I have on my monitor.
Yeah.
So sometimes that'll even look like printing out like something locally that I'm like, okay, this is exactly what we like, and then sending it to the factory.
Wow.
For them to match. And then they have like huge fabric printers, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, the most recent one we did is like, if you can tell, it's like the background. So it's inspired by the in the resurrection, but the background is like cardiovascular tissue. But I like changed the colors, not like a copyright-free image of like a little like tissue thing. And then I was like, okay, but we don't want it to look like someone's walking around in like a sciencey cardiovascular thing. So like just recoloring it and painting it and stuff like that. So it was like this trippy, fun thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're playing around with more stuff like that. But yeah.
I love that. Yeah. No, I mean, everything that you make, it just is, it's just beautiful and elegant. Like that's the word that comes to mind. Is there's just something like, I don't know. It's hard to describe. I mean, elegant really is the word that comes to mind. So anyways, I would love to continue chatting with you, but I have to go to the dentist.
Gotta get going, right?
So, I mean, gotta take care of your teeth.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds important.
But I love what you're doing. I love that there's intentionality behind everything. Like, obviously, there's always going to be intentionality behind the design, but there's intentionality behind the company, behind your practices, behind your whole motto. I think, I don't know, to me, like that's what Catholics should be doing. Like, we don't all have to be theology teachers and, in religious life. It's beautiful, but like whatever your field is, just take that intentionality and that person focus, I don't know, way of operating, and, be a lawyer, be a pizza maker, or whatever.
Delivery guy, yeah. Or even just, I mean, like, oh my gosh, I mean, you gotta go, but like my friend Erin started this group called Art House 2B here in the city, and it's like this collective of Catholic artists. Not all of them are doing faith-based work, but because they are so in such a like loving relationship with God, and their art involves something from their person, it's just imbued with this like certain something, that just is so palpable. And that's what I want, is for people to be drawn in by beauty and to wear one of our garments and remember like their own goodness and not be what they bring into the world. So they become the sort of conduit for God, not just the clothing.
Right. Yeah, no, because there is a way that you can, we didn't get to talk too much about this, but there's a way in which what you wear can be honoring yourself and then honoring your maker. And then of course there's a way in which it can be just consumerism, or look at me, look at me, look at me. And I don't know, you can almost just like when I look like browse your website, there's just this, you just get a different sense. I don't know how to explain it, but you're like when you said a contemplative clothing line, which is kind of a strange, way to describe something, but there's just beautiful things to admire. Like as you're scrolling, you don't feel like when I go on a website, like I don't know, I don't even online shop that much anymore, but I just find myself being like add to cart, 20 tabs open so I can like compare like all these different dresses. And it actually almost becomes stressful,
Yeah.
So anyways, I love what you're doing. Hopefully we can chat again sometime, but
I would love that so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And enjoy the rest of your day.